Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe, and I'm adjunct faculty at Columbia College Chicago in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all my students. It is March 1st and spring is coming early, I think. It's a nice sunny 50-degree day here in Chicago, and that's 50 degrees for us after a long winter is always feels very good. I hope wherever you're at the weather is good and you're having a good day. All right, today we are looking at materials, Vray materials for SketchUp. And here is a rendering of our final version. We're going to look at how to apply several materials. Before we jump into that, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe. Click on the big red subscribe button. Click on the bell for all the notifications. There's something here for everyone. Whatever software you're into, chances are there's a video here for you. Just reached over 10,000 subscribers, so I'm pretty pumped up about that. Looking to get to 20,000 soon. All right, if you are looking to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Alfonso_Peluso, and you can see what my students and I are up to. Some really good work to see here. All right, so let's jump into this tutorial. Okay, so I'll open up a new file here. And we're starting with this blank canvas here in terms of materials. If you haven't checked out the Vray SketchUp basics and the Vray SketchUp lights tutorials, you'll want to go back and take a look at those, and that's where this scene comes from, those two tutorials. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. Okay, so we're going to start with applying a material texture to the floor, so a wood floor. And I'm going to go ahead and search seamless wood floor textures. So what I'm looking for here, let me get this typed out here, seamless wood floor texture, and I'll go to images. So what I'm looking for here is some texture that is almost square. You'll see in a little bit why it's nice to have square textures. And I'm also looking for something that covers a decent amount of area. So for instance, this image here, it is square, but it doesn't cover that much area of floor. I want to cover more floor area. I need the image to capture more floor. So more is better in this case. So if I click on this first one here, that one is not quite square, but almost. I'll get away with it. And it covers a much larger area of floor. So I'm going to go ahead and open this image in a new tab. And I'll right click and save image as. And go ahead and get this in the right place. And I'll give it a name. It's always good to give it a name, not to leave that long web name that it has. So I'll just call this wood floor. Okay, now I need to know ahead of time the size of this material so I can tell Vray and SketchUp what size to render this out at. And if I count the number of wood floor planks here, just by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, I have 28 wood planks. And I'm going to say that each of those wood floor planks is 4 inches. Now I do like to exaggerate a little bit the size of my materials in a rendering, just so they pop out and they show up a little more than what's in real life. So about 4 inches, and so that's going to be about 28 times 4 is 112 inches. So I'll remember that number, and you'll see we'll use that number when we're over in Vray and SketchUp. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select my floor, and I'll go to Edit Inverse Selection or Shift Control I, and I'll go to Edit Hide. So we're looking at just the floor. Okay, so I'm going to open up the V-Ray Asset Editor, and you see there's a lot of materials here. A lot of these materials came from the Google 3D warehouse. It's not Google anymore, but the 3D warehouse. And that Corbeau Chaise Lounge that I have in the scene, that brought in a lot of materials. And they're not named so great. So we're going to make sure that we name our materials really well so that we know what the material is and what it's applied to. Now what I like to do is I like to use this Purge Unused Assets. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I'll say yes to Purge. Okay, so that got rid of a lot of materials that weren't being used or are not being used. Okay. All right, so I'm going to make a new material. I'm going to right click on the sphere and choose generic. And I'll right click on that and choose rename. And I'll call this wood floor. Okay, and I am going to put the texture right here under diffuse. So it's a diffuse texture. I'm going to click on this little texture slot button, and I'm going to choose bitmap, and I'm going to choose wood floor. And to see it on the V-Ray sphere, I'm going to click on the back arrow, and now I can see that material. And I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to make sure my wood floor is selected. Okay, I'm selecting my wood floor, and I'm going to right click on wood floor and say apply to selection. Okay, and that applies it to that selection, which is the wood floor. And you can see it's not to the appropriate scale. So I need this wood floor to be at the right scale. If I zoom in, it's just tiny little tiles of wood flooring. Okay. So I have had situations where it doesn't let me apply the material, or it just doesn't apply to it, and I have to actually remove the old material. So I do want to spend a second to take a look at that in case that happens to you, where it's just not applying the material to the object. So we're going to go to View, Toolbars, and we'll go down to V-Ray Objects. And I'm going to go, or not V-Ray Objects. Sorry, I want, so View Toolbars. We'll look at V-Ray Objects in a little while. I want V-Ray Utilities. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and dock that. Okay. So there is a Remove Materials button. So sometimes, again, it won't let you apply the material. So just go ahead and click on Remove. It removes it. And then you can right click and apply to selection. Okay, so let's look at the scale of this. How do we adjust the scale? So I'm going to close some of these rollouts in the tray, and I'm going to go to Materials, and I'm under Edit, which is not the default. Select is the default. So if I go under Edit, there is a size that I want to make this. So I mentioned that it would be 112 inches. So I'm going to unlock this and make this 112. And the benefit of having it square is I know both of these values will be 112. So I don't have to guess, if it's not square, what the ratio is of it. And I'll go ahead and lock this. Okay, so now we're seeing the wood floor texture. applied at the right scale. Okay, so I want to render this and give this some glossiness, and I'll want to see that in a rendering. So I'm going to go to my scene, camera 1, and I'm going to start an interactive render. Before I do that, I want to check on the size that this is rendering out at. So I'm going to go to settings, and right now it's set to 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to reduce that to 800. And I'll go back to my materials, and I'll go ahead and start the interactive render, which is the teapot with the hand. Make this window smaller. Okay, so there I'm seeing my wood floor texture. I want to see this with some reflection. So I'm going to go to reflection, and where it says reflection color, I'm going to slide that to the right. Start to get some reflection. Okay, so that's working well. So we'll do this again. We'll do it now with a brick material, and we'll apply a brick material to this back wall. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the interactive render, close V-Ray. I'll select that back wall, Shift-Control-I, inverts the selection, then I'll go to main menu, edit, hide. Alright, so let's look at putting a brick material on this wall. Alright, so we'll go back to the web here, and we're going to type in brick wall, seamless texture. And I've been having a hard time finding good seamless textures for brick. Most of the good ones have watermarks on them. But I did find one that was decent. It's this one. It's not as much area, wall area, as I would like. I would typically want to find more wall area, a brick that has more wall area. But this one, since it is seamless, it works out pretty well. Okay, and it's almost square. So I'll go ahead and right click and choose Open Image in New Tab. And I'll right click and Save Image As. And I'll just call this brick. Okay. Alright, I'll open up my V-Ray window, and I'll make a new material by right clicking on the checkerboard sphere, choose generic, and I'll right click and rename it. Call this brick. And I'll place my map in the texture slot by choosing bitmap and choosing brick. And I'll click the little back arrow to see it on the sphere. And I'll select it, the brick wall, the wall that I want to turn into a brick wall. I'll right click on brick and choose Apply to Selection. Okay, so same thing we had before, where it's just tiling at a really small scale, so we want to set that size. So this brick, if I go back to the web here, so each brick is about 2.6 inches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of these. So if I didn't have this one memorized, but if I take 12 times 2.6, so 12 times 2.66, I get about 32 inches. Okay, so that's going to be the size of this brick, about 32 inches. So I need to set that over in SketchUp. So I'm going to unlock this and make this 32 inches. And I'll make it 32 by 32. And I'll go ahead and lock it. And now you can see that brick texture. at the right scale. It's definitely less seamless in the SketchUp window. In the V-Ray window, it looks a lot more seamless. So let's confirm that. Let's go to camera 1. And let's start the interactive render. Okay, so there's too much light on this right wall here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that light. So I'm going to go to my V-Ray window and I'm going to go to lights. And I did a good job naming that so I know which one it is. It's the rectangle wall. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Okay, so that's looking decent. Let's now look at making an area rug to put under our chaise lounge. So I'm going to stop the interactive render. And I'm going to make a rectangle. So I am going to just type the shortcut R for rectangle, and I'll draw this rectangle. And I'm going to make this rectangle 8 feet by 12 feet. So I'm just typing that in, 8 feet, comma 12 feet. Okay, and that makes the size of it. And I'm going to push-pull this with my shortcut P. I'm going to bring it up just 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to type in 1/8. And I'll make a window selection so I can make this a component. Okay, I use the shortcut G, and I'll call this area rug. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this. So rotate it 90 degrees if it snaps for me. It's probably best to do this like in a top view. Okay. And I'm going to move it and see if I can move this without it moving up like that. I'm going to keep it down on face floor. Okay, we'll see if that's in the right spot. Looks like there's a little bleed from the floor onto the rug, but we'll see if it's okay. Alright, so we have that. Now we're going to go back to the web and make a material. Alright, so these are, the reason that I'm using the web is I can search for custom materials. I'm not tied into the default materials that V-Ray has, and we'll look at the default V-Ray materials toward the end. But I want to be able to, whatever I'm envisioning in my head for the material, I want to be able to use that. So I'm going to the web to do that. Okay, so I'm going to type in area rug texture and go to images. Okay, so these, I'm not worried about it being square. So I'm going to pick this one. It's got a little border around it, but that is kind of helpful. It makes it look like the border edge of an area rug. I could also crop that out in Photoshop if I needed to. So I'm going to right click and open image in new tab. And I'll right click and choose save image as. And I'll call this area rug. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a new material. So I'll right click on my material, choose generic, right click, choose rename, and we'll call this area rug. And I'll click in the texture slot and choose bitmap and choose my area rug. Click on the back arrow just to see it. Alright, it's already selected in the scene. I'll right click and choose Apply to Selection. Okay, so it's competing with the wood floor, so it's not at the right height. So if you ever see that your two materials bleeding with one another, that means they're at the exact same level. So what I'm going to do is change this so that it's at the right height. So I'm going to hide this floor, or hide the wall rather. And I'm going to select that area rug, and I'm going to move it up just a little bit in the blue, on the blue axis. Okay, and we'll see if that's floating or not. It's tough to get it right where I want it. Okay, let's go back to camera. Okay, so now you see that it's tiled, and I want it to fit the area rug. So V-Ray has this neat little tool. It's this box. It's the second box. It's Triplanar Projection Fit. And I'm going to click on that, and it fits it to that object. So it's a nice little trick there. And we'll go ahead and start a quick render. So that area rug is still not quite where I need it to be. It's floating. So let's spend a second and fix that. So I'm going to select my floor and my area rug, and then Shift Control I. Can right click. Oh, try that again. Floor, or area rug, floor, Shift Control I. See if it lets me right click. Yeah, right click and choose hide. Okay, I'm going to go to Camera, Standard Views, Front, and you can see that it's floating there. I'm going to move that down where it says On Edge in Floor Roof. Floor Roof is the name of that component, so On Edge. So now it's right where I need it to be. It's not competing. I do, however, need to move it so it's under the chaise lounge. I can also rotate it while I'm here. So let's bring out the chaise lounge. So unhide all. Hide some of these objects. Okay, so there's my area rug. Let's see if I can move it without without moving it up. Okay, so that's the key, is move it without moving it up. Try rotating this. Okay. Alright, that should be good. So let's go to camera, and let's render that out. Oh, it's floating again. Alright, it's because of the way I moved it the second time. So let's do a couple undos here. Let's try moving it again. Moving it again without lifting it. So this type of stuff happens. So make sure I move it in the green axis without it snapping to anything else. So I can lock it to the green axis. It's just have to figure out which arrow it is on my keyboard. So it was the left arrow. Now that locks it to the green axis, which is really helpful. So left arrow locks to the green, right arrow locks to the red, and the up arrow locks to the blue axis. Alright, let's rotate that one more time. Okay. Alright, go back to camera 1. Let's go ahead and do a quick render. Okay. So what I want to do next is V-Ray has a way that you can add fur, it's called. So I can add some texture that makes it look a little bit more like an area rug. So we'll see how we can do that. Right now it looks a little flat. So we'll make it actually look like it has the texture that a rug would have. So I'll stop this interactive render. And to do this I need another toolbar. So I'm going to go to Tools, or actually View, Toolbars, and I'm going to go down to V-Ray Objects, and I'll go ahead and dock that. And that has a fur. So what I need to do is click on the rug and then click on the fur tool, and that automatically adds fur to it, and we can make some adjustments to that fur. So let's get the interactive render going. This is actually the final render, not the interactive render. So let's stop that and get the interactive render going. We'll see if it actually renders clear enough for us. I'm zoomed in on this low quality image, but you're starting to see some of this fur that's sticking up from the, and if I zoom out just that much you can start to see it. So it's a little bit too much, it's a little bit too high, so it looks more like long grass at the moment. So I'm going to change that. So I'll go to my V-Ray window, and this is going to show up under geometry, and then there's fur. So the little box, the little cube was geometry, and then fur. And I'm going to change the length of that. I'm going to lower that length. There's endless settings here. I'm not going to deal with every one of them, but I'm going to change the length, and I'm going to change the bend so it doesn't have a bend to it, because carpet doesn't really bend. Alright, lots of settings there that you can go down that rabbit hole. So I'm getting some fur texture on there, and that will show up nicely in the final render. Okay, so something similar to the area rug is if I want to add some artwork. That's going to allow us to look again at applying a texture that fits to an object, that's not tiled but it fits to the object. So I'll go ahead and stop this. And I'll select this wall, Shift Control I, right click, choose hide. Alright. So I'm going to add another rectangle, another object to this. Go ahead and draw this rectangle, and I'm going to make this, I'm going to type in 6 feet, comma, 5 feet. I'm going to start with it a little narrower and show us some tricks on how to change the size of an object and then also change its size of the texture map. So I'll make this 6 feet, comma, 4 foot. And I'll use my push-pull, and I'm going to pull that out 2 inches. And I'll move it down a little bit. I want to make sure that I make this a component. So I'll make a, let me push-pull that because I undo too far there. So I'll make a window of this, and G, and call this artwork. And I'm just going to move it over, and I'm going to move it down a little bit. Okay. So let me find a piece of artwork to go on here. So I'm going to search Miro artwork. And all of Moreau's paintings show up here, all of his artwork. And I'm going to choose, let's see here, a lot of similar ones. That's not finding the one that I was using earlier. That's okay. I'll go with this one. So it's a little wider, so I'm going to have to make my image or my artwork rectangle a little wider. This is actually it's actually square, which I didn't make mine square, but I could. So we'll take a look at that. So I'm going to right click and open image in new tab and go ahead and save this. Call it Miro. Okay. Alright, I'll make a new material. Call this artwork. And click on the texture slot. Choose bitmap. Find my Miro. Okay. Is it selected? Yes, it's selected. So I can right click on the artwork and choose apply to selection. Okay, so it's tiled. We found that lovely button in the Vray toolbar and the Vray utilities. It's that second cube there, triplanar projection fit. I'm going to click on that. Okay, so that image was square, so it's squished this artwork in a little bit. You might not be able to tell. And I'm going to look at making that a little bit wider. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this brick wall. And I'm going to go ahead and select this component and double click on it to edit the component. And I am going to use the push-pull on the side to make it wider. Okay, so about that wide. Now it's tiling that texture, and I've tried, let me first close this component up just by double clicking on the gray area. I've tried to reset it just by selecting it and clicking on my triplanar projection fit. Why is that grayed out? Let's see, this is closed. I'm not sure why it's grayed out. Double click on it. Okay, so now I've opened the component out. I don't know why it's grayed out, but if I if I click on it, it won't projection fit. So let me see something here. Let's close this up. So that's closed. Let me go to camera 1. Okay, let's move this down a little bit. I'm going to lock it to that down axis, which is the blue axis, so that's the up arrow. So that should keep it in place, Okay. So I'm not sure why this is grayed out for this object. I'd like to remove the material, but even that's grayed out. So why is that? All right, I'll figure that out at some point. So let me continue showing you what I wanted to show you, which is to change the scale of that. So I'm going to Shift Control I, or I'm going to select that, Shift Control I to inverse the selection. And I'll right click and hide. I'm just curious if I have one of the other objects selected, what happens. Okay, that toolbar is just completely grayed out. No matter what I select. Alright, so if this happens to you at home, hopefully I figure out a way to solve that, and that will be helpful for you. Okay, so I'm going to select this box here, Shift Control I for the inverse, and then hide everything. Selection's not being nice to me today. Okay, let's zoom into that. Okay, so I'm going to open this component by double clicking on it. I'm going to select the front face. I'm going to right click and go down to texture and choose reset position. That resets it to the tiled version of it. Now if we get that button back up, then I can make this triplanar projection. So what's the deal here? Let me save this. Okay. I'm stumped to why that's all grayed out. All of those are grayed out. Alright, I'm going to close this up. I'm going to save it and open a different file and reopen it basically. That's still grayed out. Alright, next step would be to close SketchUp. Reopen that. Yeah, it has an error report, so something went wrong with it. So probably just a glitch in it. So if something like that happens to you, this is the process. Try to reopen a file, shut it down, see what happens. All right. All right, so let's bring that toolbar back out. So under View, Toolbars, that's our Vray Utilities. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so now it's grayed out again. All right, so I'm not sure what's happening there, so we will continue on. Let's right click or rather let's unhide all. Okay, let's go to our camera. All right, so we're going to make another object here where we're going to apply an opacity map. An opacity map is where you want some of the map to be transparent. So we're going to go ahead and Shift Control I, main menu, edit, hide, and I'm going to draw another rectangle here. So I'll use R. And I'm going to make this pretty big. So I'll make it, say, 12 feet, comma, 8 feet. And I'll move that over. Go ahead and try that again. That's about the size that I want it. Okay. And I'm going to move it off that wall a little bit. So let me orbit and see if I can get it off the wall. Let's make sure it's selected first. Okay, so I'm just pulling that away from the wall on the green axis. Okay. Now, that toolbar has come back to life, but it doesn't like that piece of artwork. Maybe I need to remake it. We'll see. Okay, so let's go to the web, and we're going to look for something called perforated metal. Okay, and we're going to choose this one. Okay, so where the black holes are, we're going to want that to be transparent. So let's go ahead and we're going to save this. So we'll right click and choose Open Image in New Tab. And we'll right click and we're going to Save Image As and call this Metal. Okay. All right, so let's make a new material. Okay. Generic, I'll right click and rename it. Call this Metal Wall. And we'll go ahead and apply that to the selection. Let me go ahead and select it. Right click, apply it to selection. Okay, now we're going to put our texture on it. So I'm going to go here. So I'm going to put it in the diffuse slot. Actually, I'd rather use a color for that. So I'm going to go down to opacity. So I'm going down to opacity now. I'm not putting it as a diffuse map. I'm placing it as an opacity map. So I'll go ahead and click on that and choose bitmap. And I'll choose metal. Okay, and what's happening is the black holes that were in that map are now being read as transparent. So let's go ahead and do a quick render of this. Okay, so let's get it at the right scale. Okay, so we'll go to Materials, under Edit, and I'm going to select that object. Let's see, let's stop our interactive render. Okay, it doesn't look like it's being applied correctly. Okay, so let's use since this toolbar has magically come back to life, let's click on Remove Material, and let's go ahead and add that back. Okay. Let's also, for now, let's put this in the diffuse slot as well. That might be what is freaking it out. Okay. So yeah, I wanted that in the diffuse slot to begin with. Okay, so let's see if this is going to work for us. Let's make the size of this, I'm going to make it 5 feet. And I'll go ahead and lock that, keep that locked. Okay, so you can see that on there, that texture on there. Let's see if it renders transparent. Okay, so it's rendering transparent, and you can see the holes are transparent. The object itself is not transparent, but the holes are transparent. And again, that's a really fine piece of metal there, so at the final resolution, that's going to show up a lot nicer. Okay, let's keep moving here. Let's unhide. Make sure you're saving as you go along. Unhide all. Go to our scene. Okay, I didn't stop the interactive render. I'll make sure to stop that. Okay, the next material that we're going to look at putting on are the mullions. Okay, so that is a component. So instead of selecting all of them, I'm going to go to my, I'd have to spend the time and go and select each one. what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go over to components, and I'm going to choose this little down arrow and choose in model, and I'll go down to mullion, and I'm going to right click on it and choose select instances, and that selects all of the instances of that mullion. So now I can make a material for it. So I'll go ahead and make a new material and call this mullion. And I'm going to go ahead and give it some reflection. I'm also going to change what's called its index of reflection. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to raise that value up. That just makes it a little bit more reflective. You see how it got a lot more reflective as I changed that IOR. So it might be a little bit too high. And I'm going to adjust its metalness. So give it a little bit more metal quality. Okay, that's a nice looking V-Ray metal there. And I'll go ahead and right click on this and apply to selection. Okay, I know those applied because it got a little darker. Okay, let's do an interactive render. Got to zoom out here. So the mullions look good where the light is hitting them. On the right side, I'm not getting a lot of light hitting those mullions. So it may be something that I could adjust later by adding a light that specifically shines onto those mullions. Okay, but they're looking pretty good where the light is coming through and hitting them. All right, let's stop the interactive render. So I've clicked on that piece of artwork there, and that toolbar is not grayed out. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the triplanar projection fit. There we go. That was the weirdest thing, wasn't it? All right, so we have that there. All right, so let's now make a glass material. Okay, so there's already a glass in the scene, but we're going to make a new glass material. So I'm going to go ahead and select those two pieces of glass. There's one on the left, there's one on the right. And I'll go to the material, or go to the asset editor here, and I'll right click and choose generic. And I'll go ahead and rename it, and I'll call this glass. And I'm going to go ahead and change the reflection of this. So I'm going to increase that. I'm going to click on the IOR, index of refraction, and I'm going to increase that as well. And I'm not going to add metalness to this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the opacity of it. And now it becomes a little bit see-through. So it's looking like some glass. And I'm going to add a little bit of color to this. And I'm going to do that under the diffuse color. And add a little bluish green color to it. Okay, so just to recap on some of those things that I did there. I increased the reflection color. I checked on reflection IOR for index of refraction, and I increased that. And then if I go down to opacity, I lowered that opacity down. All right, let's apply that to the selection. Okay. And I might have to give it a little bit more opacity. Let's see what happens when we render it. Okay. So it's very similar to the glass that we had on there, but now we know how to make the glass. And one thing that this glass is starting to do is it's starting to reflect the inside. There's not a lot of objects there that are, to be reflected, but I'm starting to see the lights in the ceiling. So I'm starting to see some of that interior elements being reflected in the glass. Okay. So lastly, I want to look at the V-Ray default materials and show you where those are and show you how you can use those as well. Again, there won't be everything you need there for you, but there are a lot of materials to choose from. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go to the asset editor, and I'm going to click on the left button there. And the first time you do this, you'll have to click on download. It's not downloaded automatically. You'll have to click on download to download all the materials. And you can see there's bricks, there's car paint, ceramic and porcelain, concrete, diagrammatic. There's a whole lot of different materials here for you, and you can learn from these materials and see the way that they were made. And what's nice about them is they're set up to be the correct scale. But again, it's not custom, so it's not maybe exactly the texture that you need. So we've covered the custom way plenty, and then this is the kind of default way. So I'll go to bricks, and what I'm gonna do is select my brick wall, and I will right click and choose apply to selection. Now that shows up here under bricks A01, and that's been applied. So that's a different brick material that's been applied to it, and we can see the difference. Let's bring that back up. Let's minimize some of this stuff so we can see what's happening. So I can always go back to brick, right click, apply to selection. I just want to make sure it's being applied. Okay, I don't see it changing there. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it and then apply the second one. Okay. Are these that similar? Maybe they are similar. Alright, so let's render. Let's do a quick render of this. We'll see a change in the quick render. And if we examine this material a little bit, okay, little error here. Doesn't like what I'm doing. We can see that here. You can see the little texture that it comes with. So it's not that big of a texture, it's pretty small. Alright, so I think that covers everything. Let's talk about rendering this out at the final resolution. So we can go ahead and go to our V-Ray window and go to settings and go to render output, and we can render this out at 1920 by 1080. My denoiser is on, and we'll go ahead and see what that looks like. Alright, we won't wait for that to render all the way. We'll just look at the final image here. Okay, there's the final image there. Alright, I hope you found this video helpful. My head's going to pop up in the upper left. Go ahead and click on that if you haven't subscribed. I'll link 2 videos in the upper right to Vray for SketchUp Basics and Vray for SketchUp Lighting. I will see you on the next one.